Welcome to our monthly conversations on the Congregational Study Action issue, Abolition, Transformation, and Faith Formation. I'm the Reverend Dr. Michael Tino, one half of the lead ministry team of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, CLF, a Unitarian Universalist congregation without borders or walls that includes in our membership some 2,000 incarcerated Unitarian Universalists. Accountability to our incarcerated members led us to propose this study action issue, and we are thrilled that it was selected by the 2026 General Assembly. CLF has partnered with the UUA's Commission on Social Witness to bring you these monthly conversations and to present to you resources for engaging in the study action process. Visit clfuu.org/abolition for more information, including upcoming monthly conversations, resources, suggestions for congregational study, and recordings of our previous monthly conversations that we hope can spark your congregation to engage in this issue. Thank you so much for being here today. We hope that this conversation helps you embrace abolition as a holistic concept that begins with our theology and ends with a society in which the prison industrial complex is no longer seen as necessary. Welcome to our monthly conversation.
Welcome, everyone. I am Aisha Hauser. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the absolute honor of being one half of the co-lead ministry team of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, along with my colleague who you just heard from, Reverend Dr. Michael Tino. So I do have an opening reading. It is in honor of my very dear friend who just passed away a few short weeks ago, Reverend Dr. Natalie Fenimore. It is from the book To Wake to Rise, edited by Reverend Bill Sinkford, former UUA president. Meditations on Justice and Resilience. Welcome and listen. Though you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again, come. These words of Rumi speak to the welcome that is at the heart of Unitarian Universalism. We seek to be a home for all who desire our company. We seek to make a welcome for all those in search of our good news. Come, come, little children, teens, young adults, and elders. Come, families in great diversity. Come to this loving home and safe harbor, but not to find a place to escape the world. This is a community of engagement and of creativity. We come together to create boldly, dangerously. We must create the beloved community with an awareness of how difficult it is, because it is hard work. It is work that challenges us to bring our whole selves and engage deeply and for the long haul. Our faith, our tradition, must call us into community. Our task is to create spaces where we might know and value each other. I am here, like each of you, offering my life's story as a gift to Unitarian Universalism. As a gift to you. I offer my story as an African American woman, as a mother of children of color, as a Unitarian Universalist religious educator. When we welcome all our stories into the DNA of our faith, we add value, richness, and depth. The inclusion of my story and all your stories expands the vision of who we are and what we can become. To be the beloved community, we must know that we care for each other as beloveds, not merely in the abstract, but in the particular and the personal. Wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, can we share our stories of pain and joy, memory and hope? Can we be beloved to one another? So often we are hurting and hurt when we get to the door. We need to forgive ourselves and each other in order to go forward into deeper relationship. Maybe some people cannot even walk through the door until there is a first an acknowledgement of the need to say a word of forgiveness. Forgiveness almost at first meeting. Our isolation from one another may be so great, our individual and ancestral pain so deep as to cry out for reconciliation from the start. And this reconciliation is something else that begins with listening. We must listen to our stories to reconcile. We need to make peace with the past, not by ignoring it, but by looking at it clearly from many sides. Then to move into renewed relationship, we must gain and grow from our knowledge of each other. We have all experienced times of pain, grief, and conflict that have separated us. We all need to be reconciled with something or someone. Here in our faith, we can try to forgive when forgiveness is possible. Our ears open to hear each other's voices, our eyes ready to see each other clearly, our hearts enlarged to hold each other's pain and joy, our arms entwined to embrace as we journey. Don't give up. Don't stop listening to one another. Presente, Reverend Dr. Natalie Maxwell Fenimore. So welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about what does accountability look like. So I don't have a PowerPoint. I do have a handout that we will be displaying. And can we put it in the chat, Cam? I want to thank Cameron, who is our technology manager at CLF and is behind the chalice, CLF Tech Support. And so I will be introducing the handout that I think we can add. Maybe I can add it. Oh, excellent. So Cam's going to put it in the chat. And then I'm going to go over it with everyone. And then I'm going to invite you to talk in small groups. I'm going to ask you to have a scribe to just kind of take some notes about what comes up for the group so that way you can report back. So we're going to talk about what accountability looks like because I think sometimes people use the word accountability and they really mean punishment. And so it's really important to think about what it means to be in a mindset of restoration, restorative justice that includes accountability. So I got this from a Center for Restorative Solutions. And so this is not my document. This was a document that was, thank you, Cam, that I got from the Seattle Center for Restorative Justice. So I'm just going to read it, comparing what we have now, which is a punitive system, to what a restorative system can embrace if we centered that. So the punitive, what we have now is it asks what law was broken, who did it, who broke that law, and what punishment do they deserve. And in the United States, I've never gone to law school, but I know I've heard the phrase, possession is 9/10 of the law, right? Because our system was based on ownership, was land ownership, literally ownership of human beings. So from the start, from the founding of this nation, of the United States, there's been a very punitive system. It has always been based on what the laws that reinforce ownership and oppression. Because it is not an accident that the carceral system and the punitive system in which we exist targets Black and Brown communities and people with less resources and the poor and the disabled. So when that's the punitive system, if we lean into and move to a restorative process and mindset and system, the questions are asked instead of what law was broken, who has been hurt by this event and what are the effects? So it goes immediately to impact rather than a law on a piece of paper, right? Instead of asking who did it, the question is, what are the needs of all those affected? And keep in mind, the perpetrator of the transgression is also affected, right? What punishment do they deserve? Instead, ask, who is responsible and how will the harm and relationships be repaired? So it is asking different questions that are more holistic, that are more humane, and um, will center a more um, kind approach to when harm is caused. So when these questions are asked, I'm going to go to the punitive side. When you ask the question simply what law was broken, who did it, what punishment, then in the green side, accountability looks like punishment of the offender can result in exclusion, to say the least, right? That's when people are put into the carceral system. If we're talking about a school, a child or a youth can be suspended. Court-centered. Justice, I'm going to put justice in quotes here, is determined by the judicial system and directed at the offender to establish guilt. And the outcome is laws and rules determine the outcome. No regard for meeting individual needs of the offender, the victim, the person impacted, or the community. And there's limited opportunity for expressing remorse or making amends or offering repair. The person becomes isolated and disconnected. And this is true about the person who is impacted, the victim, and the person who's accused or who transgressed. Now let's move to the restorative side. When we ask, who has been hurt by this event? What are the effects? What are the needs of all those affected? And who is responsible and how will the harm in relationships be repaired? When we ask those questions, accountability can look like understanding the effects of the action, taking responsibility to make things right. So this can result in reconnection, support, and belonging. And we'll talk a little more about that. It's community-based, not court-based, community-based. So all those affected are equal, are equals discussing and developing an action to plan to correct the harm done and repair, right? The outcome is that the community impacted is the one that determines the outcome. The community explores the needs, interests, the root causes of what happened, and emotions before writing the action plan. So there's time taken in service to repair before an action plan is put together. This promotes healing by making amends and restoring trust, and the community is empowered to implement change. So when there is a more holistic approach to restoring harm done, the impact is longer. And yes, thank you, Cam. Because what we're going to do is I'm going to I'm going to together we're going to go through this. I'll answer any questions you may have immediately and then right now, and then you will go in your small groups, groups of about 4, and then I'll give you about 20 minutes to kind of reflect on the punitive and restorative approach. Now, I also want to say this document, while it is kind of meta and looks at the courts and community, this can apply to congregations as well. So an example of that would be one of the things that I teach a seminary class, and earlier I was talking about, I don't love, you're all gonna try not to faint when I say this. I don't love the word covenant. I don't like how we use covenants in our spaces because I think I have experienced them too many times to be punitive and to punish people. The concept and idea of a covenant is great. It's not in and of itself problematic. But I think because we live in a system that centers really what we've been conditioned into is the punitive court system, court-based law, who broke the law, punishment, reward. Because we live in that, it's very binary. It's hard, I think, to get out of that. So when we say, okay, we covenant to, you could list Congregations spend weekends putting covenants together. And then usually they're too long, A. And so it's not like kind of an automatic default of, but rather if somebody is unkind, like automatically, like you broke the covenant, and then there's like meetings about how to kick this person out. And I'm not sure what's gained by that. And I have been in situations in congregations where I've had congregants yell at me, be unkind to me, not often, but it's happened. There is value in saying, and Kat, I'll get to you 1 second. There's value in asking the questions of what happened, what are the needs of the community, and what needs aren't being met. Like what's happening that we can holistically enter into a deeper understanding of what's happening within the community that someone, has responded to whatever it is that happened in a way that harmed someone else. So I think the mistake folks make when we talk about accountability um, is with an abolition lens, with a restorative and repair lens, is people mistake abolition for not absent accountability. And that's not at all what it is. It's rather taking the time to be mindful and holistic so that it is in service to healing the community. Our
Mm.
blessing is our curse, although I was asked not to use the word curse, but I don't know any other way to say that phrase that's just as good. It is awesome, absolutely awesome that we are a faith that comes together and we don't mandate, we don't have a creed, we don't tell anyone they're going to heaven or hell, and being universalist and affirming of people in the fullness of who they are and how they show up
Mhm.
is a gift, and it's challenging because not everybody shows up with this. Everyone's got a story. That's why I picked that reading, not just because it's Natalie's, but also because it's a powerful reading. It's saying, hey, we're coming in with our stories. That means we're all going to show up differently. So the invitation right now, you're going to be put into small groups for about 20-25 minutes. If the conversation's going really well and you all want to keep talking, you can let me know. We'll extend it to 25 minutes, but we'll start with 20. Please get a scribe. Somebody just take, just kind of big picture notes. And look at the document and think about what questions you would ask. I don't want you to ask punitive questions in a congregation, but what would restorative questions be? What would accountability, using that framework we're going to break you up into small groups. We're going to start with 20 minutes and then we'll come back and do report back. Any clarifying questions? Everybody got that? Thank you. Okay, Cam's going to put you in small groups. Okay, everyone, I want to remind everyone, welcome back. And we are recording. So there were 3 groups, and what we'll do is each group will get 5 minutes to present your reflections, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end. So who was group number 1? Darby, are you the presenter?
I think so. Um, so we had just a lot of really rich discussion. Some of the main questions that came out were, finding a goal. What's the ultimate goal of our practices and things like that. Um, Focusing on a lot of open communication with everyone that's involved was recognized as a piece that is often missing in these conversations. Um, the importance whenever you're trying to implement this in a community of requiring really good training as well as really good modeling. So people who not only are trained one time, but who they can look to further model the behavior kind of in day-to-day operations. Um, and one of the last questions that we were just kind of getting into a little bit um, was how can we encourage a restorative environment for all, including those that may not speak up as readily whenever there are harms or injustices that need to be addressed.
That was the one you didn't get to.
Well, we talked about it a little bit, and then we kind of
Okay.
took a left turn a little bit. But
Excellent.
that's as far as questions went. I found that to be a very rich question that was brought up.
Can you say that again? I want to write it down. How can we encourage?
How can we encourage a restorative environment for
Hmm.
everyone, including those that may not be as eager or as willing to speak up
Mm,
about things that, people who are quieter, as opposed to
okay.
like me and you, Aisha.
Ha! Who are more reserved? Maybe. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. I'm just writing it down because if we have time, maybe we can revisit that. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, group one. Group two. Who is presenting from group two?
Well, we agreed that we'd all take notes, but I'm not too sure we really did.
Hi,
I'll
Pete.
try. I'll
Go ahead.
try. Um, I actually started out by giving a little bit of history about covenant and accountability and repair from the time of the 2007-2009 Commission on Appraisal Study on Article 2, when we spent a lot of time on this and made no progress. So it's a
Right.
hard problem. Um, I think in framing questions, we talked a lot about context, about where you really want to go. And this comes down to whether you're talking about an incident that looks like a pattern, or some bigger, what's the vision of the congregation kind of discussion, because people get concerned about what that really is, and that it tends to sometimes become a conflict. Um, the questions have to do with feelings and invitations. So that you desire to get inputs from all the people who are concerned. So that means the group may be different depending on the kind of an issue you have. You're going to make people vulnerable. And so the facilitator has to be reasonably adept. But we also have to admit that sometimes they goof, and they probably should try to address the goof in the same methodology if it's, big enough to stop the conversation, uh, so that we can go on with the rest of the questions. And sometimes that's just the facilitator doesn't ask the question very adeptly, uses jargon or something. Now, could I ask the other two members of my group, invite them to see if they have something that I didn't say something about?
Thanks, Pete. Allison, were you in group two?
I was indeed. Well done, Pete. Thank you. I think a lot of it was about the importance of the question and the agreement on the questions to begin. And that was the context that Pete was discussing, like how large a context, how large a container do we need for the questions? So is it this particular meeting that we're having right now in this community as we're sitting here now, or is it this larger experience that dates us and brings us back to earlier experiences we've shared? So that's just working on it a little bit more. Thank you again, Pete.
Thank you, Allison. And Shayna, were you in group two?
Yeah, I was gonna say I think both Pete and Allison just covered it very well. We had a lot of very rich discussion, and we were really honed in, I think, on the fact that it was asking questions rather than declarative. It was like we're gonna start with questioning rather than saying this is how it's got to be every single time. So yeah, really, really, really like that discussion.
So a lot of approaching with curiosity. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to write that down and then we'll get back to it. And group three.
Um, Both Ruth and I were kind of taking notes.
Malice, you are
Yeah.
super low, my friend.
Oh my gosh, it always does this.
Yeah,
She,
actually, I think we ought to sort of say that we had really good discussion, and all of us probably might want to jump in at some point. And I'll go back to you to start, Malice.
Sure. So I don't have great notes, but we started kind of talking about, well, I asked the question of like, in restorative justice, how do we make sure that like the transgressor is treated as an equal and not targeted, for what they've done, and how to, as Kat put it, come to an equitable solution, that I'm sorry, I did not expect to present because I'm bad at presenting. But the idea that equality and equity are not the same thing, and that, someone who's causing harm isn't necessarily going to be treated, so to speak, equally, but as long as what happens going forward is equitable, we're not taking from them, we're not causing them harm.
And actually, one of the things that we ended up talking about, because of my interest in climate change and climate work and climate justice, was the issue of who is the community, and based on since it can become a very large issue, the community can become a very large community, and how do you, in fact, make sure you've got you have representatives of equal to the issue that you are trying to deal with. And we talked a little bit about the fact that at this point, then also we're dealing with the problem that's generated by the fact that capitalist corporations are considered equal to individuals, and they kind of have a whole different perspective probably on things like data centers than individuals do, or smaller communities would have, because it is their goal to be a revenue generating entity, in many cases anyway. And I found one of the things that was mentioned by group two to be really interesting in terms of the question and the needed container, because that's kind of what we're talking about now. What is the container that's needed for a climate justice issue? And I think that's probably a really big thing that I need to think about between now and June, when it becomes the question of climate change or climate justice, and taking an abolitionist view to that particular issue, which is really one way of looking at it from some of systems thinking kind of approach, which I hadn't consciously been bringing back to, and it's a good thing to remind myself to go back and pull on some of that kind of stuff when I think about climate stuff. And one of the other things that we talked about was the difficulty of perceived privilege sometimes when you're trying to deal with issues of equity versus equality. And ultimately, how do you come out whole? And maybe, Kat, I don't know, maybe you'd like to jump in and say a few things?
I did it myself. Nobody had to say unmute, Kat. Um, and your question was about privilege versus equity.
Well, actually, the perceived privilege sometimes when
yeah, okay, I get it now. I remember what you were talking about. Okay, so I know what I was saying. Yeah, so I think that the goal, ideally, the goal of restorative justice procedures is that everybody comes out whole.
Yes.
But sometimes it's not possible for everybody to come out whole because, and that typically in my experience has just been that there is someone that doesn't value the process. But, but I've seen restorative justice processes misused. Um, Partly because I spent 2 decades in Portland where you're supposed to be the right kind of radical. And I know you're in the Pacific Northwest Asia, so maybe you know what I'm talking about.
Sure do.
Um, and in those cases, then I think we go back to your container, Ruth. Yeah. So we talked about all of this, but if our goal still always is that everyone knows they're not disposable. We're universalists. Nobody is disposable. And we want each person to come out like, I don't know, like in the Soroyan story for Esme with Love and Squalor, with their faculties intact.
Yeah, thank you, Kat. That was awesome. Karen raised her hands. Thank you all. All three groups, right? There were not four, there were three. Okay, everybody.
I'm kind of embarrassed to ask this question because I keep hearing this word container. I have no idea what you mean, what it means.
Excellent. This is a great segue into what I was going to continue with. So so the container is in what context? I think the first group talked about context. We're going to, for the purposes of this discussion, have the container be the congregation. So the congregation is the place where people literally congregate, have community. Sometimes people join covenant groups, sometimes affinity groups, sometimes some folks just go for worship, right? Not just, but go for worship every week. Now, the invitation that is presented when we're talking about a repair, a restorative worldview is, or to center that, and especially what the CLF is inviting folks to think about, is modeling, and somebody mentioned this as well, what happens when there has been impact and someone's been hurt feelings, usually it's hurt feelings, right? When the container, the congregation, and the container, so the meta is the entire congregation, but also it could be the guitar group. One of the congregations I served had a guitar group. So the guitar group has 8 people. They meet every month. You know, they've met for the last 12 years. The culture of the guitar group is the container. So if there is something happens between two of the members, and the container being the guitar group has set a culture of, we have difficult conversations. The youth group, I should have used youth group as an example because they do it really well. Ouch, oops. Ouch, oops, and I forgot the third one. But they're really good about saying, hey, what you said wasn't cool, or what you said hurt my feelings. And then the group, the youth group, is empowered to then talk about, hey, this person felt erased, or this person felt, or I felt erased, or I felt that when you said that, it felt like here's what they present, and what does repair look like? It would be helpful if you acknowledged that, or whatever it is. So creating a container is making the space for people to say, I have been impacted by something that went on here. Now, I think I'm going to start, and training is huge. I think one of the reasons why the CLF is offering all these workshops, and hopefully will offer more in terms of information, is to invite folks to, hey, there are a lot of resources online. There are many people who offer, and including the UUA, trainings on how to have difficult conversations, how to lean into repair. And it does take time and effort because we are not trained, we are not conditioned as a society to lean into repair. We're conditioned into cutting somebody off. So it does take more work and more, it takes an immense amount of emotional labor. And to me, it's worth it because this is the alternative. What we have going on right now is this very punitive system where we just center shame. How I'm going to go to the question, how can we encourage a restorative environment, including those who are more reserved, those who maybe are trepidatious and say anything? That actually is still part of creating the container of whichever group we're talking about. When people have, and again, youth group I think does it the best in our spaces. When people have practiced being together and there's a level of, I don't love to use the word safety because safety is relative, especially nowadays. But it's relative safety to the group. Even more, I've witnessed it again with youth group probably the most. Even more reserved youth will find their way. They'll find their voice. Um, so and sometimes it is a very intentional, hey, what are your thoughts? We haven't heard from you. Sometimes built into how sharing happens, everyone is invited. And if somebody doesn't want to say something, they pass. So there are ways that everyone can be invited to participate. It is very intentional. It is important to be intentional with it because it does not happen organically. That's not how our spaces are necessarily set up because we don't necessarily have a shared culture. What I mean by that is, I just went to Baton Rouge a couple weeks ago. Wow. So I've been to New Orleans several times. I've never been to Baton Rouge. And I've been to so many places in this country that are completely different cultures. So how people speak up, when people speak up. And I grew up in Jersey, so we are in it. We're like, we know it's not even about being an extrovert. It's just part of our culture. If you don't insert yourself and let people know what you're thinking, you snooze, you lose, right? So we create the cultures wherever we are. I had to learn a new culture when I moved to Seattle in 2013. So Karen, I want to check in with you. How is what I'm saying landing, and does it answer your question about what it means when we're saying creating a container?
Okay, so I'm very literal. Okay, so and I also, so when you mentioned about an example of a youth group, that would be considered a container for
Yes.
this particular, and would something to bring it, let's say it needs to be brought out. Let's say the container being the youth group and the people involved. So, I think we need to bring in so and so or whatever to join our I've never heard that expression, container. So let's say they have a consensus. We need to bring somebody into our container. Would that make sense? Or
I think it wouldn't necessarily be framed in that way. I'm using the word container so it encompasses many different things. It's not necessarily a term that would be used from within. So, it's almost like a diagnostic. It's almost like diagnostic. It's a descriptor. So that what we're talking about is creating the culture for empowering people to lean into naming when they have been impacted, having a culture of repair that you take time to stop what you're doing, say, you know what, something just happened, let's talk about it. So when we use the word container, we're saying that culture has been fostered over time. So for the group that said, I think it was the first group, modeling, training, that's huge because we in the US society especially, there aren't really places where people are leaning into repair and restorative practices. So the word container is a descriptor and just a way to say the community, any specific community. And there are communities within communities to make it more confusing. But if the congregation is the container, then whatever, the subcultures within it, youth group, guitar group, whatever, are still part of the wider culture. If you have a minister, a religious educator, a musician that are, when something happens, saying, hey, this thing happened, I take responsibility for it, and here's what I'm offering as a repair. That's creating a container. That is modeling for people who are around the person who's naming that. That's like, oh, okay, that's what it can look like. You're not, no one's being shamed, no one's being ostracized. Because the thing that I wanted to respond to in terms of, I did not write this well, but accountability can only happen, and I'll get to you, Ruth, when the person who caused the impact is open to offering repair and naming it. So when I've been in a position where I've caused impact, I will say, I recognize I've caused impact. What can I do or say to offer repair? So because absent that, there's not many places to go. Now, it's not to say there still isn't the naming of harm and repair needed within. Sure. And that can also be part of saying, having boundaries, but still holding somebody's humanity. I am not saying any of this is easy. It is the work of humaning, so that we continue to center care and we hold each other. Ruth.
And I was just going to say that, and part of the culture is making sure that you have the right people in the conversation, depending on what the issue is. And maybe that's a given, but
No, I think and I wanted to actually thank you for bringing that up, because the issue with climate change is a fascinating one. As everything's online and the internet has discovered what corporations, has had in their recesses and darkest vaults. When I found out cigar companies have known since the 50s that cigars cause cancer, oil companies since the beginning have known that oil causes climate change, right? Decades. A couple, so what that says to me is corporations and entities and countries like ours who are ignoring the Paris Accord. Actually, we got out of the Paris Accords, right? There is an unwillingness of those corporations causing catastrophic harm to take responsibility. In fact, it's the opposite. They're doing everything they can to avoid responsibility. So in terms of us as a society, then what does holding a boundary look like? Now, we used to have laws that, I guess we still have some laws, right? But this is where divestment, boycotting, we do have to be strategic about what kind of boundaries we set as a society to say to corporations, we're not going to keep giving you money because you are actively harming. So, I don't know if that's a perfect answer, Ruth, but it's a way to think about accountability on a meta scale. Is these folks don't want to be held accountable. Quite the if anything, they're leaning into, they just don't care. So that's hard for a lot of reasons, not least of which they're destroying the earth.
And actually, let me just say one quick thing that relates to that. And the congregation that I work with on climate issues and climate justice, we're trying to work as locally as possible these days so that maybe we can actually affect some sort of change. And so again, you'd be choosing your like who you involve carefully, but this is one of the issues that just it goes from micro to macro, and
Oh, 100%.
you just have to figure out sort of what boundary do I need in this case.
Yeah.
And sometimes it might be within the congregation boundary as to what are we going to spend our money on.
100%. Yeah. Thank you, Ruth.
Mhm.
Mary or Shayna, did you want to hop in with anything? And Darby, I don't know who will. I think everybody has at least said something. I'm not sure. I want to make sure people feel. Mary.
Sure. I think that it is really important to have the right people at the table. And I think it's really important to have someone modeling the restorative behavior and questioning that we want to see from everyone, including answer the way questions are answered with lots of eyes and lots of not finger pointing. Because one of the comments we heard in the group was that the people, there was a situation and there were people who were really being aggressive about their approach to the individual who had caused harm. And to me, that's not really useful. But if someone's there to model, and we do have those training programs, and I'm fortunate to be in a congregation with a minister who really actively models. And we've done a lot of the right relationship training, and we were all, a number of us are involved in among. And so I think, and had some situations that needed to be dealt with. And I'm not sure they were totally resolved, and I'm not sure that all situations will be totally resolved, but they came to a place where the conversation could continue.
Excellent. And that's the thing. We cannot overstate how important modeling is because the work isn't a one and done. You can get the best trainer, the best consultant in the world, but unless they're a part of your congregation, there is something about folks internalizing and practicing because we are human and we will make mistakes. And so we have opportunities to practice having, and what I say to folks is the more you have difficult conversations that center empathy, the less scary they become. They're never easy, even for me. I mean, I'm about to say even for me, but I have difficult conversations a lot. Partly because this is the work I do, but so it's not that they become easy, they're not scary anymore. And it takes a lot of preparation and understanding ourselves and not necessarily being attached to outcome. That is a hard one for me that it took me a long time to learn, is not being attached to outcome.
Not wanting to fix it.
Not wanting to fix it and knowing that where the community lands or the group or the people involved may not be what I envisioned. It may not even, I mean, it's getting to a place of what does healing look like for the entire community. So that goes back to context. Who needs to be at the table? How do we keep the community whole, help the community become whole? So to me, like one of the analogies I use, I don't know if anybody on the call's ever been in physical therapy. It hurts. Like when I've had an injury, physical therapy toward healing hurts. And I have to remind myself, no, this is actually good for me. I feel like it's the same with repair, emotional repair. It's like, this is not easy, this hurts, and it is heading toward healing. And I think that's the invitation for us as Unitarian Universalists, because I think we're one of the places that can learn to do this well and help plant seeds. Because our folks are out in the world, we don't have places that do this, not enough. Like there's not places where we can make mistakes, cause harm, and still be held. Because this is where I disagree with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Some of you have heard me say this before, and I'll repeat it. I don't think my call is to love my enemy. My call is to keep my enemy human. I am called to never dehumanize another human being or someone who caused me harm, because that is how we end up with genocide. all over the world. That is how we end up with corporations not caring, that entire communities are losing water, have poisoned their water. We don't care about the quality of life for the vast majority of the world, the people who are causing harm intentionally, right? But I still have to humanize them because it is a slippery slope. So I'm not, once I kind of freed myself from the idea of I need to love everyone, I'm like, I don't know that that's a thing I could do for a lot of reasons, but I can my spiritual practice is to humanize never, never, never dehumanize anyone. There's someone I follow named the History Wizard who is an expert on genocide and Holocaust studies. Yeah, Darby knows that I see some nods. And they posted recently in the last couple, it might have been an old post, but I saw it in the last couple weeks. They said, everyone you hate and everyone who hates you deserves to thrive, deserves to have their needs met. And I was like, damn, that is abolition right there. Like, there's all the abolition work we have. Like, no one deserves to not be treated humanely and given everything they need to thrive. And that's where I think once they said that, I'm like, yeah, right on. I don't have to have folks that I'm not a fan of in my sphere, but certainly I want everyone to have what they need to thrive, whether or not they hate me or I hate them. But my call is to center humanity. So I'm going to ask each person to say in 3 words or less, okay, a sentence, their takeaway from today. What are you taking away from today's conversation? And keep in mind we're recording, so don't say any names.
I would say begin with questions.
Ready for change.
Clarity.
Karen, did you want to go? You unmuted.
The stress for the need of good modeling that's been repeated, so important to have, to practice, to watch and listen and learn from those that do very good modeling.
Thank you.
Looking for feelings.
Humanizing the aggressor and protecting their humanity, helping others to see that they are human, even when they are vicious.
I'm struggling with how to word this, but all I can think is like the punitive structure is rigid and this requires flexibility.
We are not truly alone.
We are not truly alone. Go ahead, Ruth.
Keeping humanity and community at the center.
I think we got everybody. Allison, did you go? Yes. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Cam, for tech support, and thank you each and every one of you for coming. Thank you so much. You truly, I am deeply grateful to be on the journey with you all. Thank you all so much. Please have a wonderful rest of your May. Yes, I appreciate you all so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ciao.